Thinking of playing Boots and Saddles from the Assault series. Game turn 2, the American first movement phase. Okay, so operations point allocation. Here's the headquarters for Alpha Company, 6th Squadron. They're in visual contact with the Bradley platoons here. You're going to spend 1 operations point for formation change and another operations point to move the Bradleys in formation. So then go to change formation to combat formation like that, and then movement is 1, 2, 3, and actually, what I want to do is have them move up behind these woods here and dismount the infantry. Now, I haven't found this specifically in the rules, but I'm doing the reverse of what I have found. So to take examples here, what the rules say is a transported unit is like that, a transporter is like that, a transporting unit can move to the unit it wants to transport and mount it in that hex like that. So what I'm doing is I'm just doing the opposite of that. I'm assuming that the reverse is possible. So 1, 2, 3, and then dismount the infantry in the same hex. Units that dismount can assume either formation and any facing, but that's where I'll leave them like that. Okay, so this is what I want to do. Here the headquarters unit, it's barely on the screen here, has 2 M1 platoons with it. What I want them to do is I want them to change into combat formation, and I want them to get over here to this wooded hex. So just this one here. So I just want them to slide south. But they're going to be doing all of this. Well, platoon stacked with the headquarters, there should be no operations cost for any of this. But the question is, yeah, they will be doing some of this in line of sight of the Russians here, the Soviets here, and it's those BMPAs. So my first question is, when they first change formation, oops, I did this stuff out of order. Oh well. All right. Disregard that this is out of order. When they do the formation change, actually, I guess they should go that way. So if they change into combat formation like that, I'm trying to get both on the screen. If they do that, okay, so it's changing formation within line of sight of the Soviets and cover there. Does that draw opportunity fire? Now the first thing is there's a woods here. So this also entails, are the Soviets looking over the woods and can they even see this hex? And then if they can see it, does it draw opportunity fire? If not, then what happens when the Americans move the 2 hexes here? Okay, lots of questions, but I need to tackle them at some point. So actually there's another question, because when I draw the line, the line goes over this hex here, but it only touches the green part. So is this treated as the exact same level 0 as the unit that I'm looking at? I mean, is that the reason for the split level diagram there? Because that would be, in this example, we're only touching the 0 part. So that's another question. Okay, the rules make it sound like different colored portions in a hex are at that level. So the line of sight goes over the 0 portion of that hex, so I'm assuming that that is treated as 0 elevation, so not an issue. So again, back to the question of, does this one wooded hex block line of sight from these Soviets are clearly at level 2. They're clearly on light brown there, so there's no question there. And obviously the Americans are clearly at level 0. So does a level 1, basically this is an easy way to look at it, does a level 1 woods at this point along the line of sight block line of sight from the Soviets to the Americans? Okay, this is how I'm using the line of sight graph, and hopefully I'm doing this right. Before I use both hands, the only thing that I'm going to mention is that the woods are at 7 hexes from the Soviets. Soviets will be at 0. The Americans are at 13 hexes, range in hexes, and the woods are at range of 7. So at 7, those woods come up to level 1. Okay, so I put the line over here. The Soviets are at elevation 2. The Americans are at level 0 at range 13, and you can see that there we go. You can see that the line of sight just barely clips the level 1 line at 7 hexes. So I think just barely. As a matter of fact, let's see if the Americans had been at basically if the Americans had been at 1 more hex away, or certainly 2 hexes further away, the line of sight would have gone over the woods, but actually it's clipped here. So they didn't observe this change in formation. Okay, so the Americans move south 1 woods hex, and now the line of sight is open from the Soviets to the Americans, remembering that the Soviets are up on that rise right there, just a couple hexes off the screen there. So okay, what's going on here? First of all, not even getting to the full spotting rules yet. I'm not using those. We have line of sight, but at what point can the Soviets take opportunity fire at the Americans, understanding that the Americans are going to move 1 more hex here? So they're going to use 1 more hex to move here and use their they have it's 2. In combat formation, it's 2 movement points. So 2, 4, and then use the 5th movement point to change facing. But at what point can the Soviets conduct opportunity fire? Yeah, I was thinking about the opportunity fire limits table. So first of all, if a target begins the phase visible and remains visible, then there is no range limit. But if that does not apply, then we use the opportunity fire limits table, because remember, the Americans did not start this phase visible. They've now moved 1 hex and they've just now become visible. And so basically the maximum is out 12 hexes. So yeah, so I like this a lot, but it doesn't apply. We are actually at 13 hexes. So okay, so I'm going to move him. That's 4, and rotate for 5. And what's happening is basically from that distance, so we are talking over 3 kilometers, just over 3 kilometers. This movement appears, relatively speaking, so small at this distance from the perspective of the Soviets so far away that there isn't there is not a realistic opportunity fire circumstance, and I like that. Yeah, so that is normally you retain the facing of the last hex you moved from, unless you spend one more movement point to change facing. So that's movement point number 5. The M106 mounted mortar there is basically left behind, and I notice now that this M106 section is not self-ordering, so it will just stay back behind there and wait for operations points at some later point. Now, if the Soviets are anywhere from 13, 14, anywhere from, well, about 14 or 15 hexes away from the M106 unit, I'm going to double check the range of the M106 real quick, and then this will wrap up the Americans' first movement phase of game turn 2. Yeah, so there is no issue range-wise. M106, 4.2-inch mortar, range 22. Okay,